Hello and welcome to the React Native Show podcast. I'm Łukasz, your host, and in this episode, we'll dive deep into the migration to React Native. We'll talk about migration from native to React Native, expanding React web apps with cross-platform availabilities, and the two main approaches to use in migrating to React Native, greenfield and brownfield, and what to remember and what to avoid during the migration process, and much, much more. So stay with us. Let's get started and introduce my guest. Joining me today is Mike Chudziak, Head of Delivery Department at Callstack and great expert in brownfield development. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Łukasz. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to see you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, Mike, as we know, as me and you know, you are my boss. So I'll let you start easy and I will ask you an easy question. So your official title is Head of Delivery. And I must admit, when I joined Callstack several months ago, almost a year, I didn't know what that really means. So maybe you can explain to our listeners what are your daily responsibilities at Callstack.
Sure, but before I do it, I'd like to say that it is my second time on the React Native Show podcast, but it's first time I will be talking with you, and I'm super excited about it because we've been working together for a while, but we rarely have a chance to dive deep into topics as technical as migration to React Native. So yeah, thank you for the invitation again. And getting back to your question. At Callstack, I'm managing a team of developers, project managers, and quality assurance engineers. And on top of that, I'm responsible for ensuring the highest quality of our service delivery, hence the title, which means setting quality standards, best practices for both development and managing our projects. And even it sounds a bit managerish, I still have many opportunities to touch the technical stuff. For example, I provide technical consultancy for our key accounts, and I do some open source.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I know that you had a lot of opportunities to talk about this subject that we are in right now. So migration to React Native, brownfield development in React Native. Can you quickly summarize for me what are your credentials in this area, why we should listen to you?
Because I love React Native and I'm good at it. But jokes aside, I'm the person who really believes in React Native. For me, it's an amazing framework that brings a lot of business value and is very pleasant to work with. On the other hand, it is just a framework to enhance mobile development. And I was always very keen to understand what lies under the hood. That's why I've been exploring native technologies from Objective-C to Kotlin in order to understand how they solve certain problems. So I participated in many web and mobile projects, both React Native and native, and I think I have a good grasp of both strong and weak points of these technologies. And based on that experience, I created a library called React Native Brownfield, which is a set of tools for facilitation of the integration of React Native into native apps. It's very useful in such migrations. So I think that's all in terms of my credentials.
Yeah, let's put a pin in the React Native Brownfield library. We'll talk about it in the following part, but maybe we can start in more structured way, and
sure.
We can discuss from your experience what are the main reasons our client come to Callstack to migrate their apps.
Sure. So there are multiple reasons why. I think we can split them into two main categories. First is addressing existing pains, and second is creating gains for the future.
So future-proofing.
Yes. Or basically creating business benefits for the future. Yes, so in terms of first category, the stimulus for such a decision is often a thing that's bad for your business. For example, the application has poor performance and you lose users or receive low App Store ratings. And in such cases, we can either try to optimize the app or migrate it to the new one. And while I'm a big fan of optimization, sometimes it makes no sense to deal with existing code base, and it's better to create a new one. Another example of the pain point might be an increasing technical debt that slows down the development process for new features and makes maintenance of the existing code base a nightmare for developers. But dealing with the pains is not the only scenario to make such decision. And regarding the other scenario, which is
so maybe I can add one point to the pains that you mentioned, and I feel like in some projects, in some companies, there is this drive to deliver features and to kill bugs, but the technical depth and like the quality of the code base is often overlooked. So it does make sense to at the same time migrate to some newer, better technology, and at the same time increasing the quality of your code base. I think that is very important, that we don't lose this quality mindset during the process.
Yeah, definitely. And addressing pains doesn't exclude having gains. So yeah. But speaking about the gains, even if your app is working well, you might think of ways to improve it from technical and business perspective. And trust me, React Native is really good at it. So it speeds up the development process without like introducing any additional charges, as developers might use same code base on iOS, on Android, and maybe other platforms as well. So this minimizes development costs, and you can build an app in a fraction of time without affecting the quality. And that's a key thing here. And I can tell you that if you do it right, every board will be happy with the final quote. But besides that,
you're cutting down from 2 different teams to one team with JavaScript developers with some native background, instead of having 2 different teams specified in native development for iOS and Android. So of course that will cut costs.
Yeah, definitely. And the velocity itself, or velocity of programming itself, might be faster even if you compare specific platform to React Native. For example, writing a feature in native iOS might take more time than writing same feature in React Native.
For both platforms.
Yeah, definitely. So it's not a golden rule, let's say, but in many cases it is like that. And another thing that I wanted to mention regarding positives of adopting React Native is a possibility of adding new platforms gradually. So I think one of the biggest selling points of React Native is having an abstraction that is reusable between web, mobile, desktop, and other platforms. It opens another door, because if you have a application, let's say a purely web application written in React, you can convert it to React Native, it doesn't take that much time. So we can do it in fairly short amount of time, and this way you can expand to the market and operate on different markets, like I said, mobile, desktop, etc., which opens up more opportunities for the future.
And when you mentioned desktop, like a few years ago, Electron came out, right? And you could write React applications for desktop. But right now we have React Native Windows and React Native macOS, which allows you to more or less use the same code base, but your application is native as on Android and as on iOS. So that brings you huge performance benefits and other benefits as well.
Yes, definitely. So I think Electron is a good technology as well, but you can compare it to the PhoneGap versus React Native.
Yeah.
So you can achieve good results in both, but I always prefer to do things natively. So React Native for desktop, React Native for macOS, for Windows can help you achieve that. And yeah, reusability that I mentioned is also a big selling point.
Yeah. So, are there any other reasons why you would want to migrate your existing web application, mobile application, desktop application, maybe even to React Native?
Yes, so I believe there are many, but one that comes to my mind is good developer experience as well. I like
Yeah.
coding in React Native. For example, when I've been coding in native iOS, I had to rebuild the application each time I wanted to see some changes. I know that now it has changed since they introduced Swift UI and the developer experience is way better. But for me, seeing the changes live, like with hot reload, it's a nice thing to have at work.
Yeah, definitely. And you can streamline the process for all of your team, not for just one, for one platform. You streamline the process for this one team that will create your monorepo, for example, right? This uni application for all the platforms. And I think it is a good moment to point out that with good developer experience comes better velocity because your developers
Yes.
are happy, they're producing code more they're producing code faster, and also you can deploy your applications at the same time with the streamlined release process using some like over the internet tools and not using the native upload to App Store
Yes.
solutions.
Definitely. That's also a benefit. And another thing that comes to my mind is open source community. It's amazing in React Native. I totally love this community, love these people. I love how everyone contributes to the greater good. And it's simply pleasant to work in such environment.
Yeah, this might be a good time to plug some like Callstack recruitment processes here. If you want to join Callstack, you will be able to work in open source and work within our repositories. And you can also help us out with our repositories, not joining Callstack, but just contributing to our repositories. Okay, I think we have the benefits of migration wrapped up. So where maybe we can move on to the other part. And the other part I wanted you to ask is where do we even start with migration process, and what should people be prepared for when preparing for migration?
That's a very good question. So generally, I suggest following a top-down approach, where we start from what I call defining the big blocks. Such big blocks are, in fact, elements of the migration process or migration phases. So from my experience, when I'm working with such migrations, I defined 4 major components that every migration should contain. And those are, first of all, business evaluation, second of all, development planning and preparation, then implementation, and then validation and rollout. So basically, this is how the process looks like from a high-level perspective. And what you need to do next is you need to break it down into some smaller pieces. So also, I strongly recommend to approach it in agile way. So it means that some of these steps might be repeated multiple times on a smaller scale. But answering your question precisely, before doing anything else, you need to know where you're at the moment. So evaluate your starting point. And the route to the beach is different when you are in the exclusive 5-star hotel with a beach view, and it's different when you are in the middle of the swamp.
I really like this comparison.
Yeah, but in both cases, you can achieve the same results. and feel the ocean waves on your skin. But there is a difference in the process in between. So I have several supporting questions that can help you evaluate the starting point. And those are, first of all, define what competencies do you need in order to perform the migration, and then compare it to the competencies you have in the team, because the gap will define the requirements for the team. Then think of platforms. So which platforms do you operate on at the moment? Which platforms do you want to expand to? And then consider questions specific to the, let's say, project itself.
So like let me interrupt you here. Like you said before, if you have a web application written in React, then it's no-brainer to migrate to React Native. But more generally, if you have your application written in something else and it's all up in the air, then your selection of technologies you might be willing to work in is different.
Yeah, or maybe not the selection per se, but how to prepare for such migration in terms of skills of the team, for example. If you have React developers, you can train them to operate in React Native, and that's fairly easy process in comparison to if you have the native team, and then you need to teach them a new paradigm, which is also doable, but then you might think of strengthening your team with some external resources to help you. But getting back to my initial thought, then some questions or things to tackle around the project. So see if you have feature maps and good project documentation, because it helps a lot. Do you have a complete design guidelines? Do you have user stories that describe the behavior of the app? Is your code itself well documented? And last but not least, do you have tests that are agnostic from the implementation?
Yeah, and I feel like the whole selection you just mentioned, the documentation for user stories, for your designs, for your design language, for tests, for code itself, some of those are nice to have, let's say, but some of those are a must. If your project doesn't have some of those, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, definitely. So having green lights in all of these areas will help you succeed in the migration, will help you avoid the regression, will fasten the overall process. However, I have to tell you that I rarely see all positives in all of the areas that I mentioned, but organizations still manage to succeed. So you just have to accept that the process will be longer and more fragile.
And I guess the process of migration itself can also help with documenting, right? Because you are creating some of this from scratch, some of this you are re-engineering, you have to rethink this. So this is a good point to use this opportunity to document at the same time, so you don't so you don't end up in the same place like 2 years from now.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of stuff can be reused later, as you've mentioned, and will help you increase the overall quality of the not only code base, but the project itself. So at this point, it's also good to define some KPIs or CTQs that you want to maintain or improve in the final project.
Can you explain what KPi and CTQ is?
Yes, sure.
Not for me, of course. I know that you are my boss. I'm not saying that I don't know that, but maybe some of our listeners.
Sure. KPIs are key performance indicators. So basically some metrics that will help you track if you are on track. And CTQs are critical to quality. And those are factors that are most important for your end users. So usually you start with interviewing your customers, defining what's important for them, listening to their voice, and then translating them to these factors. And it helps you have a good overview on where you are at.
shall we move on to brownfield part? So before we do that,
Sure.
I want to share some insider knowledge that I got from Wikipedia in the morning today. Um, so we are in the software development environment. We are talking about this greenfield, brownfield approach, and I like until today I took it for granted because I didn't know really what that meant. Like I knew what that meant, but I didn't know where the terms come from. So I read up about it, and I know now, and I can share this with you and all our listeners. So the terms are coming from the property development market in like Great Britain or something. So if you go and you buy a new land, and this is a green field, then it is easy to build upon it. And if you go and you buy land in the inner city, maybe this is some post-industrial or something like that with some buildings on it, then it's brownfield, and that entails that you have to clear it up before you start developing the land. So this is the origin of greenfield and brownfield development. And I guess this is a good metaphor. Like it fits very well with like application development as well.
Yeah, definitely. I also was surprised back in the days when I Googled it that it has its roots on civil engineering. But long story short, greenfield is about writing from the scratch, and brownfield is about writing on top of something that already exists.
Yeah. So let's now focus specifically on brownfield in React Native. And we covered your credentials before, and I know that you've done tens of different brownfield migrations. And is there a template that you use? What is your process in going in, getting your heads dirty, and starting to do a migration to brownfield?
Okay, so specifically speaking, in case if you are migrating from native applications to React Native mobile applications. Yeah, if you have an existing native mobile app, or actually apps, because usually companies target at least iOS and Android, you can start to benefit from React Native without rewriting whole application. So you can start either by adding some new features in React Native on top of existing application, or start replacing it, start replacing some existing technology with React Native. And it's a fairly simple process, but it has powerful implications, as you can quickly cut down the cost of feature development. You can write the feature once and use it on every supported platform. And of course, from time to time, you need to do some platform-specific adjustments, but that's not often a case. And speaking from short-term perspective, you can start shipping your code way faster than you would normally do it. And from the long-term perspective, as React Native code plays a bigger and bigger role in your code base, your maintenance costs will be reduced. And mostly it's caused by two facts. First is that you will have a fresh code base with no technical debt. And second, that you will need only one team to maintain the code base and develop new features. So ultimately, it's not only about the reduced development costs, but also if you don't need to get rid of existing app, you don't need to do it, or you don't need to stop the development and to start the migration process. So you can, in other words, you can continue generating revenue and keep developing new features in the process.
Yeah, and like the benefit from like deployment perspective is that this is the same application that lives in the App Store, in the Google Store. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to do anything different than you are doing right now. You can still use the same system and build upon it. That's great.
Yeah, definitely. also, I wanted to share with you a few words, tips about how we as a Callstack do it. But before I do that, I want to tell you that at the beginning, the process itself has a bit of entry barrier to overcome. And what I mean by that is that you need to have a good grasp of the JavaScript side of React Native, as well as its underlying native internals. And in order to be fully effective, you should have at least an average understanding of native development, as you will work with the native code, to some degree at least. And what I'm trying to say is that it's good to know the environment. For example, imagine if you would like to renovate a house. So it's good to know which walls can be destroyed safely, where electric installation is, and how hydraulics looks like.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think that average understanding of native technologies might not be enough. Maybe average understanding of the Android, iOS systems, sure, but then you have the whole native internals of React Native that you want to use. And that is not well documented, right? This is something that lives there. You can look at it. You can browse the repository, but it's not like the lines itself tell you what that's supposed to do, and if you can remove this part and your roof won't fall down.
Yeah. But positive thing is that once you establish a good brownfield integration, you don't have to deal with the native code that much. What I tried to say is that you need to understand the code in order to reverse engineer the requirements, or in case the requirements are not well documented, of course. But in general, it's good to have just an average grasp later. But for the beginning, the process of, let's say, establishing good brownfield setup might require a bit more advanced knowledge and might require a bit more, let's say, diving into React Native code base itself.
Yeah.
And also, I wanted to mention the other thing to consider while doing such migration, which is the people perspective. So maybe there is a team that is working on the legacy code base. In most cases, there is. And such migration is a long process. And during that process, you can focus on preparing the team to work on the new code base. Or maybe you would like to reallocate them to some other project at some point. But in both cases, they will have to operate in the existing app and tech stack for some time. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't want to introduce tooling that will decrease their productivity. And I'm mentioning that because we've had such case in the past. As when we started migration, we observed that the native team, that their performance fell. And after searching to the root cause of that, I observed that they had to, first of all, deal with the new tools like Node.js, Yarn, or Metro Bundler that are very common in JS or React Native environment, but for them it was new.
Those are common, but when you encounter a new error from Metro Bundler that I cannot find this one file in your node modules, and like it gives you like several different lines of how that file might be named, and you're like, what? Like, I'm not the owner of this node modules folder. I don't know what's going on there. So exactly. This can be a pain.
So at some point, they, for example, the team that operated in the app that we added React Native on top of, they did not know that they have to install dependencies, run npm install, run yarn, even though it was documented. Not everyone has read it, and it is a problem. Of course, some trainings help, but you have to consider it. Then the second factor is that they had to observe changes in the repo that they did not fully understand. Hence, it was harder to perform quality code reviews. And it's also important because they have all of the product and technical context, and new changes, no code reviews, that is a problem at some point. And the last factor was that they had to deal with the increased build time, as we had to build React Native related stuff. And each time they run the app, they had to do it over and over again. And the build time was increased, hence the developer experience wasn't as good as it was before, at least for them. So anyway, we quickly realized that there is a lot of things to improve, at least on our side. And we started thinking on how to overcome these issues. And we came up with a great solution that we have been using in every project since then. So we created an engine to encapsulate React Native, JS bundle, assets, native classes, and all of that into one file, one native artifact. So native teams had to deal only with the final product, which were either a AAR file or XC framework file, and they were able to interact with it as they would interact with any other native UI library.
I was gonna say it's like adding manually library to your Android project. You just put the file in there and it works.
Yeah, or use some package manager. They could use Maven, or they could use CocoaPods, things that they are used to. So they didn't have to deal with React Native environment. Their build time was decreased to a number similar to what they had before, because we pre-built everything that was related to React Native. And finally, they had a full understanding of their code base.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and if you're interested about these cases, generally at Callstack, we did multiple integrations like that in the past, so you can read about some of them in the projects section in our website.
Oh yeah, we have some case studies and we have some articles, and we have you on React Native Show podcast number 6. And we have you on the conference, React Native EU, so we will link all of that materials below this episode.
Sure. Yeah, and regarding stuff from the podcast or stuff from the conference, at some point we found that a lot of these steps are repetitive, and we recreate the same code over and over again. So we thought that it would be good to extract it to an open source library. And this is how React Native Brownfield was born.
Yeah. So React Native Brownfield was introduced in 2019, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
2019. And since then, we are working on the new version.
So can you tell us who authored it? Was it you? Was it you with some other folks at Callstack?
Yeah, initially it was me with Mike Grabowski, our CTO, and we initially thought of a set of helpers to facilitate integrating React Native into existing native apps. So, it saves a lot of time, as you can omit several initial steps, as well as decrease entry barrier for developers who work on such project. And at the beginning, those steps usually are, first of all, you start with preparing some native classes that render React Native components within their bounds. Then you load JavaScript bundle. You store an instance of React Native Bridge into some singleton and reuse it between different different components. And then you prepare JavaScript API to, let's say, compose native and JavaScript navigators, because that's often a case that you have to embed the screen into native navigation hierarchy, and you do not want user to notice that at some point there are operating in React Native.
Yeah, this was actually the hard part when I try to visualize how Brownfield works. So you can imagine that if you have a mobile application written in native Android, you could do React Native as like completely different set of screens and like just link the two words with just one intent, one navigation change. And you are in the native now, you transfer to React Native and you browse in React Native. The hard part for me is how do you mix and match the native with with React Native, which is still native, but with some bit of JavaScript on top of it. And how do you maintain the whole system? This is really mind-blowing for me. I didn't do much of a brownfield, as you can imagine.
Sure. Yes, so I will tell you about the maintenance in a second. So I will be speaking about what's going on at the moment in React Native Brownfield. But before I do that, I will answer the part regarding the integration itself, which was covered in initial release of React Native Brownfield. So generally, you don't need to create a separate intent. You can embed React Native into Fragment or an instance of Android Vue. So basically, you can embed a React Native component into native hierarchy, which helps a lot, because then you have native navigator, for example. You have navigations based on fragments, which is, I think, the standard now for Android applications. And at some point, you render React Native within that. And what you need to do, basically, is to toggle which navigator is active. Is it the JS one or is it the native one? So React Native Brownfield has some helpers to do that.
Okay.
And I promised to talk about the maintenance part. So let me tell you about the next release of React Native Brownfield, which will include the encapsulation engine from the case study I mentioned before, as well as many other killer features. So first of all, we'll provide you with a CLI that lets you build an artifact with one comment and plug it into your continuous delivery process. And you will be able to publish the artifact to any place you like. So GitHub Releases tab, or things, the native package managers that I mentioned, CocoaPods, Maven, Jetpack, or any place you want. So the CLI itself. And then another great feature that we are building right now is the generator of native components. So think of a React Native components with some annotation on top that is strongly typed using TypeScript, for example, a button, and it accepts some styles like text and callback. And our generator will be able to create a native button, a native class that will extend UI button or Android button, and it will accept properties like text, callback, and styles in a constructor, and render your React Native button under the hood. And thanks to this engine, you will be able to easily create unified design systems that can be consumed at whole organization, while keeping only one source of truth. And that source of truth will be written in TypeScript plus React Native.
Awesome. I like that idea.
Yeah, me too. Everyone's going to love it. I'm sure about that.
This is a true killer feature. So where is it coming out?
Yeah, so about that. I think that slowed us down a bit, or actually slows us down. But it is an important addition for me personally, is the adoption of new React Native architecture. So we will support turbo modules and fabric renderer. although it increases the complexity of the project and difficulty. We believe that having this support is super important for the sake of top-notch performance, and we do not want to release without that. That's why it's delayed a bit, but it's coming this year.
So I think it's understandable. So you will be maintaining two different implementations, right? The old renderer and the fabric, the old native modules and then turbo modules.
Yes, for some time, I think it's a requirement because we cannot resign from the old architecture, even though we'd like to. But until the community is ready for, let's say, complete adoption of a new architecture, we will support both.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to the Brownfield migration to React Native?
No, I think that's all. If you are interested in some more details, I strongly encourage you to watch the previous episode of React Native podcast, or episode number six, if you mentioned. Yeah. So I was talking about React Native Brownfield library per se, and you can hear some more details on that.
Before we end this episode, I was thinking maybe we can take a detour to talk some more about the web migration to React Native. Or is it a good idea? And do you even call it a migration, or is it a conversion? And are terms brownfield, greenfield even apply to this kind of process?
To some degree. So in this situation, I would consider two specific cases. First case is when you have an existing web code base and you want to migrate it to React and add the support of React Native. And second is when you have existing React application and you want to expand to other platforms, for example, mobile. And in terms of expanding to mobile platform or any other platform that supports React Native, I would call it a conversion, because ultimately this is what it is about. And I think this term is more suitable in this case. In the other case, I think it's rather a migration, because you need to adapt a whole new technology.
Yeah, okay. Is there anything else you would want to
Yeah, sure. I can tell you a few words about the conversion from React to React Native, because that's a common case that we deal with at Callstack. Specifically speaking of such conversion, maybe starting from the time that is required to convert the code base. It really depends on several factors. So you need to ask yourself, again, a few starting questions. So see if your components are small and modularized. See if your code is decoupled from platform-specific implementation. See if you use regular React DOM components, or for example, you use React Native Web, which would help a lot, but it's not a prerequisite. Then how do you handle styling, and how different web and mobile layouts are? And answering these questions will help you estimate the level of effort required to perform the conversion. So the good thing about that is that there are plenty of tools that can help you implementing the support to other platforms. For example, React Native Web that I mentioned, it exposes standard React Native core UI components that are compatible with web. And you can use them instead of regular DOM components like div or p tags. If I can give you, let's say, one tip about the whole migration process here, it would be to divide and conquer. So create small leaf components, compose them into larger ones. You can follow the atomic design, for example. It will drastically help in the process itself.
And so I was going to mention that React Native Web is a huge library, and there are huge companies using React Native Web. Two I know are Uber and Twitter. Twitter
Yeah.
and Uber web applications are built using React Native Web.
Yes, and not only that. I can't call exact names, but many of our clients adopted this technology, and they are really happy with it. So yeah, I strongly recommend React Native Web. It's mature, it's nice to work with, and yeah, it's cool. But it doesn't cover one thing that it is a challenge to overcome in such conversion, which is styling. So if you are using some CSS in JS solutions or inline styles, the amount of effort should be slight. But to be completely honest with you, I'm not a big fan of these solutions, as they often come with the cost like performance overhead.
Even though we have our own open source library for CSS in JS code.
Yes,
Inaria.
but that one doesn't, because it's used in the build time, not in the runtime. So if you use Linaria, it's great as well. But if you are a dinosaur like me and you like plain CSS or SCSS, the amount of work will be significant. But thankfully, we have some tools, some open source tools that helps in this process, like CSS and React Native. We'll leave you a link in the description, but generally it helps a lot.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mike. I think that wraps it up. We talked about migrating from native to React Native. We were talking about migrating from web to React Native, from React Native to web as well, because this is that's the same process, I guess. We talked about greenfield, brownfield solution. I must say I'm really impressed by your knowledge and by your expertise. I know why you are the head of delivery department. That covers, like you say, quality assurance and development and all that. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode of the React Native Show podcast. I was Łukasz Kludziński. Thank you everyone for joining as well, and see you in the next one.
Thank you a lot.